Hello and welcome back to day 2 of Titanic week and our short exploration of some of the myths around the Titanic disaster that have been propagated by movies and popular culture. And one of the more unshakable myths of the Titanic disaster is the seemingly endless debate that goes on as to what the final tune played by Wallace Hartley's doomed band actually was. It's frankly a bizarre debate for historians and enthusiasts to have. Does it really matter? Well, actually it does, because if nothing else, historical research is a search for truth, and to find that truth you've got to be able to get past the myths, the rumours, the opinions and the guesses to get, as best as you can, to the facts. Every detail that you can confirm or deny brings that picture closer to completion. So without further ado, we're going to dive into this debate. It's a dramatic and haunting narrative of futility as the band resign themselves to their fate, but stoically play their last, making their final moments the playing of Nearer My God to Thee, almost an act of prayer. The trouble is, it's almost impossible to substantiate this as an actual fact. The earliest starting point of this legend that I can find comes from a brief mention to the New York Central News Agency, which is syndicated around the world and appears in newspapers everywhere. Mrs. Vera Dick, a Canadian first-class passenger who survived with her husband, gave the comment, "As the boat went down at 2:30, I saw the ship's band lined up on deck. They were playing Nearer My God to Thee." Now, if we examine this closer, then iceberg-sized holes start to appear in this as a testimony. When Mrs. Dick was recovered at 7:30 in the morning by the Carpathia, she was in lifeboat number 3, which had launched from Titanic's starboard side at 1 o'clock in the morning, a whole hour and 20 minutes before Titanic was lost. In charge of that lifeboat was able seaman George Moore, who knew damn well not to stick too close to a sinking ship lest they get pulled under when the sea finally gets her way. In short, he knew that they needed to be 200 yards away at least. The very idea that someone, over the panicked chatter and arguments that were going on in Boat 3, from 200 yards away and 30 to 40 yards down, against a backdrop of steam venting and constant orders from the crew, could hear what the band was playing is absolutely absurd. Also, at the time she states there were no lights on Titanic and hadn't been for 15 minutes. The idea that she could see the band on deck from that distance and at that angle, in darkness so black they hadn't seen the iceberg, is again absurd. I think we can reasonably discount Mrs. Dick's comments as incorrect. So another testimony that seems fit to name an actual tune is that of Harold Bride, one of the 2 Marconi radio operators aboard Titanic. He managed to get off in, clinging to, collapsible Boat B. He was certainly on board as close as possible to the end, as Boat B was actually swept off the deck as the bow went down. Now here we're quoting from an interview he gave to the New York Times pretty much as soon as he got into New York. "Smoke and sparks was rushing out of her funnel. There must have been an explosion, but we had heard none. We only saw the big stream of sparks. The ship was gradually turning on her nose, just like a duck does that goes down for a dive. I had only one thing on my mind, to get away from the suction. The band was still playing. I guess all of the band went down. They were playing Autumn. Then I swam with all my might. I suppose I was 150 feet away when the Titanic, on her nose, with her afterquarters sticking up in the air, began to settle, slowly. The way the band kept playing was a noble thing. I heard it first while we were working wireless, when there was a ragtime tune on for us. The last I saw of the band, when I was floating out in the sea with my lifebelt on, it was still on deck, playing Autumn. How they ever did it, I cannot imagine." Now, Bride is a more credible witness than our earlier Mrs. Dick for a number of reasons. Number one, he categorically stayed there until the end. He wasn't even in a lifeboat when the ship went down, and he was swept off deck. Number two, Also, he had very little chance to actually mingle with other people aboard Carpathia, as his frostbite and other injuries kept him isolated in the hospital bay. He had little, if any, opportunity to be influenced by stories from other survivors. But his story does have areas that raise doubt and raise questions as well. First, he was the only survivor to have reported hearing this. Second, this interview is the only time we have recorded anywhere where Harold Bride mentions this. And thirdly, Autumn, whether the hymn or the waltz going by that title, neither of these things were actually in the White Star Songbook. We're not saying he's wrong, it's just that his count can't be corroborated, and we need to bear that in mind. And one of the last pieces of testimonial that we have regarding the band and the song choices is that of Colonel Archibald Gracie, who wrote his account immediately afterwards and gave us one of the most detailed survivor testimonies that we have. On page 20 of his book, he writes, "I did not recognise any of the tunes, but I know they were cheerful and not hymns. If, as has been reported, Nearer My God to Thee was one of the selections, I assuredly would have noticed it, and regarded it as a tactless warning of immediate death to us all, and one likely to create a panic that our special efforts were directed towards avoiding, and which we accomplished to the fullest extent. I know of only 2 survivors whose names are cited by the newspapers as authority for the statement that this hymn was one of those played. On the other hand, all whom I have questioned or corresponded with, including the best qualified, testified emphatically to the contrary." We have more testimonies as well that any music being played was going to be upbeat, ragtime style tunes, of which there were many in the White Star Songbook. Even the can-can was played on deck at one point. Now, it could be that Wallace Hartley chose a swan song of his favourite hymn and that the orchestra could play it without music to hand. We'll never know. But certainly nobody who was there at the time of the last song and who survived states so. So in conclusion, like many of the issues surrounding the Titanic, we just can't come to a conclusion. This legend and argument will go on as long as people are interested in the Titanic disaster. And why shouldn't it? So we started out by asking, why does this debate even matter? Well, it matters because it keeps the memory of those musicians alive in history. And so it should. Thank you. Bye-bye.